Happy Sunday, everyone. Hope you're all doing awesome. This coming weekend, of course, is the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. So I've done a musing or two on the past, and today's I want to talk a little bit more about it because, as you'll recall, the church, specifically the First Presidency, put out a letter earlier this year in which they invited members of the church in the United States to join together in a special Fifth Sunday and fast. I've talked in a past musing here or there about some of the service projects that have been done around this as well. And let's just read this letter from the First Presidency so that we can see what it said. That came out March 12th and said, "Dear brothers and sisters, the United States will celebrate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence throughout 2026. A new video will be available on churchofjesuschrist.org in which President D. Todd Christofferson and Elder Quentin L. Cook will offer instruction about the significance of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and related events that enabled the restoration of the church. All wards and branches in the United States are invited to use this video during a Fifth Sunday meeting on May 31st to discuss the importance of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and how these documents support religious freedom and our God-given agency. Additionally, on Sunday, July 5th, this next Sunday, all are invited to participate in a unified fast to express gratitude for religious liberty and to pray that it be strengthened throughout the world. Please convey this invitation to members of your stakes, wards, and branches beforehand so they can prayerfully consider the focus of their fast. Over the course of 2026, members are also invited to participate in service projects and activities associated with the 250th anniversary observance, including projects organized through Just Serve and Family Search." So I've highlighted before how the church's focus around this seems to be on, donating some food to food banks, and let's do family history, and that kind of narrow focus around the celebration. Parenthetically, I was asked to teach my ward's Fifth Sunday lesson for May 31st. I was not in town, so I couldn't do that about this lesson. And so then plan B was they've asked me to speak in a couple weeks because July 5th will be Fast Sunday, of course, and so July 12th, they've asked me to speak on expressing gratitude for religious liberty. And I think the take that I plan to have is, I've shared in these musings my takes on religious freedom and how I think it's too myopic a fight, that it's really the more foundational freedoms around property rights and freedom of association and free speech. But this idea, because they say here in the letter, this is why my bishopric is asking me this way, a unified fast to express gratitude for religious liberty. So I've been asked in my ward to speak on how we can express gratitude for religious liberty. And I think the approach I might take is, can you really truly be grateful for something if you don't understand it and you're not kind of defending it when it's under attack, and you don't understand how it's threatened and so forth, right? So, having a primary level, like, we're thankful for this, whatever, if we don't actually understand. And we'll see what I talk about. But that is the letter. It's familiar, I think, to you by now. Here is just a brief clip from that May 31st video that was mentioned. Well, so with this emphasis, if you want to call it that, on the 250th anniversary by leaders of the church, I thought, and the subject of today's musing is, it was a curiosity. What did the church do 50 years ago around the 200th anniversary of the United States of America? What you'll find as we get through this musing, I think, is a large contrast between what was done then and now. To start, I wish I had it. I bought it. It's like the only copy available anywhere. I found it on eBay. There are no others. Like, there's nothing on the internet. So I had it at once, and I bought it, like, I don't know, 6-9 months ago. And at some point I misplaced it. But here is an image of a booklet that the church put out called 101 Ideas. It's a bicentennial booklet that the church put out, basically an FHE kind of supplemental full of different activities that church members and wards could do together in celebration. This was put out in 1976. Here is an image of the introduction letter from the First Presidency, the leaders of the church. I will read just a portion of this letter. It says, "Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believe that the United States of America was founded through the inspiration of the Lord and that its freedoms were established for the restoration of the gospel. No matter what your nationality, you are spiritually tied to America. You are also culturally tied to America because it is made up of all cultures and races. Our interesting and unique differences are what have made the United States of America the greatest republic on earth. No other people believe in freedom and in the worth, dignity, and rights of each individual more than we do. These are basic principles of the gospel. Therefore, church members, particularly those living in the States, should lead out in promoting the, quote, spirit of 1776. Celebrating the 200th anniversary of America's birth involves much more than a passive admiration for this country. It involves active rededication to the principles laid out by the Founding Fathers in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. No matter who you are or where you are, you may carry out the purposes of the bicentennial in your own land, your own neighborhood, your own family, your own community, or your own ward or branch. Study your own nation's history. Reread your own governmental documents. Review and show respect to your own civil laws. Search out your own genealogy and write your own family history. Preserve your own culture and natural resources. Restore your own historical sites. Honor your own national heroes and community leaders. Help solve your own community problems and preserve your own freedoms that will allow the gospel to spread throughout your homeland and the world. In almost every community, large or small, bicentennial committees are already organized and are working on worthwhile projects. We encourage you to contact them and volunteer your support. Avoid isolating yourselves in your own bicentennial activities. Plan projects in which you can involve non-members, a whole neighborhood, and the whole community. Projects that will help foster a feeling of brotherhood. Volunteer your time and talents to the bicentennial director in your state." And then it goes on to say all activities need priesthood approval, and that if you're doing any activities, you have to analyze it through this framework of questions like, is this going to be open to participation by many people? Are gospel concepts being promoted? Does it reaffirm the basic principles of freedom? Are people able to develop their individual talents? Is the activity contributing to our understanding and our heritage? So then the booklet is full of different proposed activities that you can do in your community, with your ward, as your family, that all have kind of this patriotic tinge to them. So again, I wish I had the booklet. Don't know where it went. There were lots of examples. I will say they were all kind of quaint and dated, many of them. There was actually this funny song towards the end about kissing cousins. Like, a lot of the things in here were pretty corny. But it does demonstrate the church's efforts to promote activity and community engagement and outreach and volunteerism during the 200th anniversary. So then I went and dug up some discourses that were being shared in 1976 surrounding the 200th anniversary of the United States of America. Okay, so let's begin first with Elder Perry. In 1976, this is at a BYU devotional. And I'm just going to share a portion of this video which highlights his involvement in the 200th anniversary. Take a listen.
I was in the process of gathering some thoughts together for this talk and received a phone call from my daughter, Gay. She gave me instructions not to speak on a bicentennial theme. She said, "You're becoming typed. What will happen after the 4th of July? No one will ever want you to speak again." But today, when she saw me wearing my bicentennial tie, she said, "I guess I failed." Her idea was to have an entertaining talk, one that had a number of stories. And I've had a great and strong impression on the subject that I'm to speak to you on today. And Gay, I'm afraid I can't follow your counsel and advice. For 2 years ago, I was given a major responsibility. As these last 2 years have progressed, I believe I'm beginning to understand the magnitude of this assignment. Now, I want to be very specific with you today. I want to talk straightforward to you about my feelings concerning America. I want you to understand how I feel about the assignment I have been given. But I especially want to enlist your help in assisting me in its fulfillment.
Through the rest of his talk, Elder Perry then goes on to mention a number of other things the church was doing. You'll note that this is a multi-year assignment that he was given. This is the devotional that he's doing at BYU was in February. So this is at the beginning of the year that he's doing this. So he's got the assignment throughout the rest of 1976. Ends up being a 3-year assignment for him. He talks elsewhere in this talk that the church printed a document to be issued to everyone throughout the church that, quote, contains our message to our country during this bicentennial year, the title of which it was God's Hand in the Founding of America. He then says that as part of this effort, we've commissioned the painting of 7 specific posters, which will be used in every building that we have in the United States during the year 1976. So they have these posters put up in every chapel in America. They were, ancient America, kind of Book of Mormon setting. The second was Christ in America, 3 Nephi 11. The third was Columbus. It's titled America Rediscovered. The fourth painting was titled Men Raised Up. So this is kind of the delegates to the convention, the Declaration of Independence. The fifth is called Inspired Documents about the Constitution. The sixth painting was titled The Gospel Restored, with a focus on Joseph Smith. And the seventh is called America's Future, and was focused on kind of families and the future of America. So this is, again, at the beginning of the year, and Elder Perry is already talking so much about this in the church that his daughter, right, is saying, like, you're becoming a broken record. You got to not talk about this all the time. But he's saying, like, I understand the magnitude of this assignment. This is a really big deal. I'm doing a lot. The church is doing a lot. So, like, that's interesting that there was this apostolic assignment for 2 years preceding this. So in part of me wondering what was done 50 years ago was my own curiosity to contrast it against what little I feel has been done this year. And for reasons that I will muse on towards the end, speculating why there's so little kind of more patriotic type American emphasis during the 250th. But it's clear from Elder Perry's talk that a lot is going on in the church with preparing for and participating in the events surrounding the 250th anniversary. Okay, then in the April 1976 General Conference, there are, you got Elder Tanner with a talk all about, America titled, If They Will But Serve the God of the Land. You got Elder Benson giving his landmark talk called The Constitution, a Glorious Standard that many people have cited. So there's some focus on it in the April conference, of course, because that's preceding and leading into the July event. In May, the following month, Elder Marion G. Romney, he's the second counselor in the first presidency. He gives a devotional at BYU as well. So this is just a couple months after, 3 months after Elder Perry. Elder Romney is giving a devotional at BYU titled America's Fate and Ultimate Destiny. And those aren't the only 2 BYU devotionals, as you'll see in just a moment. So then we get the June Ensign, June 1976. This, of course, is the month leading up to the 4th of July. And by the time people are getting their July Ensign, it's after the holiday. So the June issue of the Ensign is the kind of patriotic issue that the church puts out. And there are a number of, the whole thing is just pretty much infused with this kind of Americana political type of focus. Elder Perry's got an article titled The Church in the U.S. Bicentennial. Elder Holland has one called A Promised Land. You got several other non-leaders writing articles titled Wise Men Raised Up. Another one titled Declaration of Dependence, Teaching Patriotism in the Home. Another titled Some Duties of the LDS Citizen. Interestingly, this is the essay, the Ensign. This is the issue of the Ensign in which President Kimball publishes his landmark excoriating address article titled "The False Gods We Worship." It is in this issue. So while the whole issue is about yay America and yay patriotism and 200 years, President Kimball's article is "The False Gods We Worship," in which he rebukes Latter-day Saints in particular for worshiping gods of stone and steel and considering as patriotic the soldier, right, who goes around and kills people and so forth. I hadn't understood that context until just preparing for this musing. I was looking through the June Ensign, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, because President Kimball never gave that address in conference. It was just an Ensign article that he wrote. And I knew that it was, 1976 and probably knew that it was June, but I didn't have that context for, oh, this was the 200th anniversary and this is the church's like patriotic issue of the Ensign. And President Kimball, right, here's the president and he's being asked to write something and he doesn't write this fluffy yay America thing. He writes "The False Gods We Worship." If you've not read that, if it's been a while since you read it, go look it up. It's powerful. But wow, knowing that I had that context makes it, for me, far more interesting. They also have this section in the Ensign titled, they had this for like years or decades, titled "I Have a Question." And it's where members of the church could write in and ask a question and they would get someone to answer it. And perhaps they just kind of made up their own questions to answer. I don't know. But it was like this Q&A column, and they would get various people to write answers to the questions. For example, one question was, what is the difference between the American Revolution of 1776 and the rebellions in our own time? The answer was written by Richard Bushman, historian. Another question, what is a citizen's duty if a democratic government is oppressive or supplies only a limited amount of freedom? Answer, Dallin H. Oaks, who at the time was president of BYU. I will let you speculate on what his answer was. I think you could pretty well theorize what President Oaks would say about duty to oppressive governments. Basically just says 12 article of faith, so comply, with extremely, extremely, extremely narrow exceptions, as he says in that article. There's another question, what should be the place of national feelings among church members? Where do my patriotic feelings fit into the gospel? What is the role of compromise in government? That's from Wallace Bennett, politician. Another question, does the concept of an inspired constitution mean that additional changes cannot or should not be made? And finally, did Joseph Smith say that the Constitution would hang by a thread and that the elders would save it? So, very patriotic June 1976 Ensign issue. Then in August, President Ernest Wilkinson, for whom the Wilk is named, he was the BYU president at the time, gives a devotional at BYU titled America 1776 to 1976. Okay. So a lot's going on. A lot of BYU, they're using BYU as kind of a, let's talk about it a lot there. It's talked about in the April conference. It's talked about in the Ensign. And then there's a lot more going on. To substantiate that and to help you understand how broad this was, let's bring back Elder Perry. This is in the October 1976 conference. So before we heard Elder Perry speaking at the BYU devotional at the beginning of the year, here is him speaking. I'm going to play a bit of a longer clip because he walks you through everything that's going on the part of the church as an institution to help promote and organize the celebration and the education and the attention and focus on these kind of, patriotic type activities in and through the church. So let's take a listen.
As we approach the end of 1976, it seems appropriate for me to direct my remarks to the church's participation in the United States of America's observance of the bicentennial celebration. I have had the exciting experience for the last 3 years of being involved with the church committee, organized to assist in planning for the proper observance of this event. During the last few weeks, we have been assembling a scrapbook to record the history of our activities of this celebration. How I have thrilled with the accomplishments each day as new pages have arrived. Each piece helps build a beautiful picture of how our involvement has satisfied a need, told a story, taught a lesson, and helped to build an appropriate observance of this great event. The bicentennial on a national scene was characterized as a backyard celebration, for there was no center. It happened in the villages, the towns, and the cities throughout all the land. The same could be said about the church. The credit for the accomplishment belongs to the individual families, the wards, the stakes, the missions, and the districts. Now let me thumb through some of these pages of this incomplete scrapbook with you and highlight some of the accomplishments for you, realizing that still a full 1/4 of the history of this year is still to be written. The first section I turn to is entitled Education. It is filled with books, posters, magazines, lesson manuals, stories, pictures, and descriptions of exciting events. I read an account of 60 special education weeks held throughout the land, designed to teach the participants of a love for country and the requirements of being a good citizen. I see the Ensign, the New Era, and the Friend magazine, replete with informative articles about the history of our country and our hope for the future. There is an account of a special freedom shelf set up in our bookstores of new and old histories of our country. It is interesting to note that one of these histories, especially written to tell the unique story of the restoration of the gospel as a part of the establishment of this nation, had a distribution of thousands of copies. I see copies of a poster series designed to teach God's hand in the founding of America. It was distributed and displayed in our chapels throughout the country. Most noteworthy has been the distribution of 821,000 copies of a special supplement to the Family Home Evening Manual. The demand for this manual far exceeded our supply. In homes across America, beautiful lessons have been taught on the purpose and destiny of this land. There is a section in the scrapbook entitled Public Communications. Here we find stories of videotape presentations displayed in our visitor centers entitled God Bless America, clippings from 1,075 newspaper articles in the United States dealing with how our church was celebrating the bicentennial, pictures of 89 dance festivals featuring dances of the colonial period, the largest having 9,000 participants and playing to somewhere between 80 and 90,000 people. There are pictures of floats sponsored by local church units in parades that were held in the nation. We have pictures of pageants centered around or incorporating a bicentennial theme. This land of America, this land of liberty in Washington, D.C., and other pageants in Nauvoo, Oakland, Independence, Manti, Cody, Hill Cumorah, and of course, above all other lands in Salt Lake City. Special billboards told a story of our belief in America. One city even installed a dial telephone number, MORMONS. By dialing this number, you could get information about the great American family and the church-sponsored events for the bicentennial. Special mention should be made of the contribution of the Mormon Youth Symphony and Chorus. Their outstanding program, America, 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 was telecast over many public broadcasting stations. How thrilled we were to watch it when we were traveling in the East in both Boston and New York this summer. It was exciting to see our Mormon communities participate in holding town meetings to discuss common opportunities
to improve their cities and towns. Many letters were received from communities thanking the church for being a part of their bicentennial celebrations. Several were received with almost identical messages of thanks as follows. We were struggling with our bicentennial program. We were deadlocked in controversy over allocating our meager financial resources to the many projects that we had been proposed. One night as we met in one of our committee meetings, we were trying to get our program moving forward when a representative of your church called and offered their support. They expressed their love for America and wanted to participate in its 200th birthday celebration. They suggested a program they wanted to sponsor, and much to our surprise, asked for no funding. The spirit of the group was carried forward into our meeting and literally saved our town celebration. Our message was heard loud and clear thanks to the Public Communications Organization. One of the most exciting sections of our scrapbook is under the label of Primary, our children's organization. Thousands of children during the last year have learned to appreciate this nation and what role they will play in preserving our great heritage. From flag-raising ceremonies to fairs, parades, instructions, poems, stories, essays, diaries, scrapbooks, posters, contests, and etc., they have learned to love our country. A special program was produced, Listen, My Children. It was a unique summer program that was put on over 4,000 times in different primaries throughout the land. I am thrilled in reading some of their original works. A beautiful book was received from the Salem, Oregon North State, with hundreds of statements addressed to how I would like to celebrate the nation's 200th birthday. From the responses from some of the children were as follows. I would like to fly the flag and show my love for our country. I love you, America. I would like to have people love everyone and be kind on America's birthday and always. I would like to keep America clean and beautiful. Then, of course, this very interesting remark from a 4-year-old. I would like to ride my tricycle, draw pictures, eat cake, and not take a nap on the 4th of July. Under the next 3 headings, youth, young adult, and special interest, we find pages full of their accomplishments. I group them as one because their activities were interwoven and familiar and similar. They were largely the participants in the dance festivals, 19 original dramatic productions, heritage fairs, bicentennial balls, etc. Most interesting to me was the host of activities participated in by these 3 organizations was their willingness to give volunteer service to the communities in which they lived. From all over America, articles with bold headings such as Youth Group Cleans Up the Canyon, Young Adult Organization Paints and Cleans Up the City Park, Special Interest Group Restores Historic Monuments. From our last survey of volunteer service hours made just before the 4th of July indicated that we had passed the 6 million man-hour mark of volunteer service. The majority of this service was contributed by our youth, young adult, and special interest groups. Our hats are off to you for your major accomplishment. We estimate today that we're between 7 and 8 million man-hours of volunteer service by members of the church since January 1st, 1976. We encourage you not to stop now. We expect to be over the 10 million man-hour mark by December 31st. I still see a need to fix up, clean up, and paint up to make America more beautiful. Yet another section is entitled Relief Society, our women's organization. illustrated with pictures, programs, songs, and poems. From their headquarters building located at 76 Main Street came forth a real spirit of 76. Our wives, our mothers, our single sisters put their tender hands on compresses to relieve suffering, industrious fingers to needles, brushes, pencils, and skillets to revive colonial beauty, to concert halls, chapels, amphitheaters, to thrill our souls with music, to auditoriums, speakers' platforms, and classrooms, to remind us of the tender role of colonial women and the righteous leadership and thoughtful teaching which must continue to come from womanhood through all ages. With warmth, with love, we commend the Relief Society for well over 3,000 special events which contributed to our bicentennial. The scrapbook is too full to mention all of the organizations and events which have come from the church's contribution to this great celebration, to the general, regional, stake, ward, mission, district, and branch bicentennial committees. I congratulate you on a job well done. In my travels from coast to coast, I have not witnessed a finer performance than that which has been accomplished by the church. Your participation has left no doubt concerning your love for this great land and your determination to preserve its heritage.
Okay, so that's a lot. And he wasn't the only one talking in the October conference. You had, Elder Benson give his address titled Our Priceless Heritage. And, there's a lot of chatter throughout 1976 on the part of church leaders, to the point where Elder Perry is assigned for 3 years to focus on this and be the ambassador or the instigator, coordinator of all these different activities. So one theory as to why it's different, because it's very different. Like what the church has been doing for the 250th anniversary is extremely muted in comparison, right? I mean, just listening to Elder Perry list off all the things that have been done and give that report, it's like, hey, let's just play this 25-minute video in Gospel Doctrine and have some superficial chat about it. Like, okay, right? And then let's invite people to fast and pray, okay? And let's invite them to do their family history and serve in a vague sense. And maybe through justserve.org and familysearch.org. And on the part of the church, we'll send some trucks around to donate food and do a few things like that. Like, praise all those, great, yay, but also in terms of just a relative comparison, it is markedly different, and I do think far more muted than what was done 50 years ago for the 200th anniversary. So the question is, why? Why might that be so different? And one answer could be just the shift in demographics. In 1976, about 80% of the church membership resided in the United States of America. So that's over 3/4, right? And today it's closer to 1/3. There's just been, in the last several decades, far more church growth outside of the United States. And so on that basis alone, one might reasonably speculate, well, at the time, the vast majority of members were American, therefore it made more sense, but now we're a quote-unquote global church, therefore it stands to reason that the church isn't going to just so heavily focus on and promote American things. You look at this with the hymnal that they're redoing as well, right? Taking out the kind of more political style hymns. And I think that argument is a strong one. But then you go back to the 1976 pamphlet that I read from at the beginning, saying that everyone has a spiritual connection to America, that there's kind of this LDS emphasis on the fact that, and this might deserve its own musing at some point, was some of these things were foretold. The Book of Mormon talks about this, but when you look at what happened to the church and how at least the Brighamite branch, largely because of all the, anyways, I won't go down these rabbit holes, but they fled the United States of America, right? And the saints that were being persecuted were not protected. And The Constitution was insufficient, and the leaders, were unwilling to lend a hand. Joseph was very frustrated. And so this idea that, the church could have only flourished in America, like the church Brighamite branch fled America, and then later, of course, through the territory, and then wanted to rejoin as a state for Utah. But that's kind of a question that I think the simplistic version of like, oh, the Restoration is why the Constitution is why the Restoration was able to happen. I would want to poke at that a little bit, because I don't think that's super, super accurate. And, God could have done it without a constitution, and frankly did it in spite of a constitution, because the saints, were being so persecuted and their rights were being violated, and the legal systems failed them and were exploited to persecute Joseph and the saints repeatedly. So I think God could do it in any political system. But that pamphlet in 1976 argues the conventional point that America is kind of tied to the spiritual destiny of the church. The two are wedded together. Therefore, even if you're a church member in a different part of the world, you're spiritually tied to America, because that's what gave birth or allowed, the church to rise, to be created. You got Doctrine and Covenants, 101, saying that by the hands of wise men, whom I raised up under this very purpose, was the Constitution established. Or D&C 98, commanding members to befriend the constitutional law of the land. Now, these verses are cited, I think, often kind of just superficially to say, oh, therefore the conclusion is the Constitution is good, and America was needed, and that's how the Restoration happened. I talk about this in Christ versus Caesar, a little bit of a different take about what these verses, I think, imply, what it means to befriend the constitutional, lowercase c, constitutional law of the land. These wise men being raised up for this purpose, talking about even like, look at the Articles of Confederation, that in many respects were superior, and the Constitution, which itself was in many ways defective to secure the rights of the people that it purported to, protect. And I think, it's one thing for the church to celebrate America's founding and its supposed connection to the Restoration, but one thing that I appreciate is that the church, and this might be why we're seeing less of an emphasis, is not only the global nature of the church membership, but also, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You don't see it getting into all this kind of nationalistic, patriotic stuff that some might infer or would apply if they start endorsing all the current activities of what is happening for the 250th anniversary and what the Trump administration is doing. You see in other like evangelical churches this infusion of nationalism, and look, I was going to play some clips, and I was just like, I don't even like watching this stuff. You get like Trump's pastor, that blonde chick, and others that are just treating Trump as like this demigod, kind of savior appointed by God, Romans 13 and all this, right? And just seeing this garbage, I on that basis appreciate that the church is a little bit aloof from that combination of the current kind of zeitgeist of America and Trump and the federal government and what's going on now. And I can see how some in the church might be like, let's just do something a bit tamer, because things are so, polarized right now, and so, I don't know, I don't agree with the word toxic, but just so concentrated that maybe it's better to chill out. Okay, so the other argument perhaps might be the shadow of Elder Benson. After 1976, you got the John Birch Society. Elder Benson's kind of open advocacy is creating a lot of consternation on the part of some of his colleagues who do not share his politics. And he's preaching about the Constitution, and it's creating some awkwardness and tension within the quorum. I don't have any specifics, but it's very possible that even though Elder Perry was the ringleader, that a lot of the celebrations and efforts on part of the church bore Elder Benson's fingerprints. I don't have any information one way or the other, but I can only, theorize that he would have wanted to have been involved and was supportive and helpful. And it feels like church leadership right now is visibly cautious about anything that could be coded as like political conservatism, especially in the Trump era. And a big celebration about America on the part of the church in 2026 would inevitably be read through the current partisan lens in ways that 1976, I think, just wasn't. You had kind of a broader Americana, like cross-party, general, whatever, whereas right now it's, the left is basically like, I'm not going to say anti-America, but anti-like Americana and all the greatness of America, and they're kind of ashamed of it and apologizing for it and blah, 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 right? So perhaps there's institutional risk from a PR perspective that the church might be, calculating around. There's also this like globalist positioning the church has been doing for, I don't know, like 2 decades, where the church kind of PR, public affairs efforts have been positioning the church as a global Christian denomination rather than an American religious peculiarity. And so a big patriotic display might cut against that brand. You think of the 2018 rebrand away from Mormon, emphasizing Jesus Christ instead, the downplaying perhaps of pioneer heritage and correlated curriculum, the deliberate internationalization of general conference speakers and leaders and really trying to draw in from other ethnicities and countries. You've got the public affairs strategy about hobnobbing with global faith leaders and the United Nations and all this like global stuff. And so perhaps, again, this is just speculation, but maybe in that frame, a 250th observance of America or the muted version is more consistent with this broader globalist posture that the church is wanting to take. Now, whether you and I find that posture spiritually satisfying, I think is another question. But these are just, again, some speculations as to why we've seen things far more muted. It could be like in removing the hymns from the hymnal. It's like, hey, look, we're not here to promote America. We're not here to have all this American fanfare and whatever, which is why perhaps even in the church's muted recognition of America's birth date, their focus is on religious liberty and agency, right? You see that in the letter. You saw that if you watch the whole May 31st video between President Christopherson and Elder Cook, right? That was the focus. That was how they were talking about it. And so it's not about broader, again, as I talked about in past musings with religious liberty, Joseph Smith's great quote, he cared about and talked about religious and civic liberty. But you kind of see from the church only focus on the former and not the latter. Looking at the letter here, right? The fifth Sunday meeting, they talked about discussing the importance of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and how these documents support religious freedom and our God-given agency. So they've kind of like constrained this broader celebration and all of its many implications, and they've tried to channel it down this religious, more narrow topic. Let's talk about religious freedom and God-given agency. So yay, Constitution and Declaration more broadly, but we're just going to talk about how it's supporting religious freedom and God-given agency. Basically, like, let's not have, Brother, Thompson and gospel doctrine go off on all these like political rants and whatever. Like, let's constrain it. So maybe there's an element there of trying to correlate the discussions in church around this, but clearly, like, you look at that letter I shared from the 1976 thing, you look at what Elder Perry was talking about the church was doing, there's just a huge contrast. So maybe this can be explained as just the demographic shift, and perhaps that's all it is. It could be that you had leaders at the time who came from the 50s and 60s and 70s, and you had this more like white picket fence, I love America type of culture, and that the leaders of that day were an outgrowth of that, whereas now the leaders are multi ethnic, different ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and even the American cultural zeitgeist of past decades has not been consistent with what it was 50 years ago plus, to produce that same type of cultural response of yay America amongst the current church leaders. And so maybe that there's just no one in the quorum of the 12 that's like Benson-like saying, we've got to really go all out and celebrate. And, instead we get this more kind of muted approach. So let me know what you think about this. I there's some few other talks out there and some other stuff that I haven't highlighted, but Elder Perry's October conference pretty well walked us through everything the church was doing, and it's a lot. And it's a lot different than what has been happening. So, however your family is going to celebrate this coming weekend, as we look at what the church is organizing and doing, even that pamphlet, like, again, I wish I had it. The thing was full of random, dated, sometimes very corny, silly little activities, but it was nonetheless an effort to kind of say, hey, we want to support families and doing stuff and communities and neighborhoods. And, here's an effort to really try and do something very intentional. And that intentionality seems to not be happening this time around. So what did I miss? What other reasons might there be for why this change has happened? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you guys there. Happy upcoming Independence Day, however you're going to celebrate. And I'll just maybe end by saying, as important as it is to look at the last 250 years and, from my perspective, how far things have declined in a lot of ways, culturally, politically, civically, the thing that I'm thinking about right now is, what do the next 250 years look like? And what do we need to be building and doing right now? How do we need to be teaching our kids? What institutions do we need to be forming? What type of cultural investment do we need? Like, what do we need to be doing right now so that these values and remaining legal protections and principles can endure? You look at every great nation state and empire, and they all crumble right around now, and I think for good reason. So maybe there's a certain inevitability about that. And if so, if in years and decades to come, we're going to go through this fourth turning cycle of just destruction, then I think about, okay, well, who's going to build? Who's going to come out of that? And who's going to understand the right principles and the right ideas to build? What are we doing with our kids to help them learn these ideas? So yay, America, yay, 250th, anniversary, great. But man, we got a lot of work to do, and we got to think through how we need to be not just celebrating or memorializing the, America of yesteryear, but what type of country do we want for our kids and our grandchildren in the future? And what do we need to do more than just lip service? What do we need to be building and focused on right now to preserve these values and ideals for them? So love your comments on that, and in the comment section. I'll see you there, and I'll see you next week.